What if you went from winning the first AMA sanctioned drone race to having disastrous results in the very first drone nationals? This is the history that Zoe Stumbaugh has lived. And that history is very rich and tells a good tale. I hope you enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you the one, the only Z to the O to the E to the FPV, Zoe Stumbaugh. How are you doing, Zoe?
I'm actually pretty great. It's been an interesting year, and I've been in a good direction. I'm really excited to be here and share what's been going on with everybody.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. It's always, like I told you in some of our chats, it's always exciting to get to hear, to get to talk to somebody when they're in an upwards trajectory. That's always super exciting and definitely beats the downwards trajectory. So
Yeah, that's a thing.
yeah, no, it really is. You'd be surprised. You get somebody on an interview and all of a sudden you're just like, hey man, the energy wasn't there. And they're like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, well, we could have done this a different time. So,
Yeah. Well, so that's like the biggest thing. There's been a period over the last maybe, I don't know, year or so. For about 8 months there, I turned
hmm
down like every interview and every kind of media contact that came my way. Because life was really hectic, like trying to move out of Santa Cruz, California, having this RV donated to me, and then essentially having to get the RV running and find another place to live. It was definitely part of the roller coaster of my life. And through all of that, it was really hard to try to find the words to talk about it all. And realistically, now I'm in a much better place. So talking about it is way easier. And there's a lot of cool new stuff going on. So I am definitely in the mood to talk about stuff again.
awesome. Well, before we get into the new stuff, let's talk about some of the old stuff. I
Ooh.
always like to ask people what their origin story is. How did you get into, so, and let's set the stage, because if people don't know you, which they probably do, but if they don't, you are not just a pilot. You are somebody with a very busy phone. No.
Sorry, yeah,
Okay.
let me turn that
No, you're
off.
fine. No, 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 you're fine. I'm just messing with you. I don't care.
It's going off again.
You're fine.
Okay.
It's not going to hurt anything. The magic of editing will make all that go away. Um,
And I'm back.
yeah, we're back. Just so that folks, know who you are. You don't fly just regular quads. You fly 3D quads, which is a completely mind-blowing thing. Like preparing for this interview, I watched a bunch of your footage, which, by the
Did you
way,
take any Dramamine when you watched?
no, I don't have to, but my wife does. My wife can't even watch my footage. If she had watched your footage, she it would. Um, the link to Zoe's YouTube will be in the description below, along with any other way that she prefers for you to contact her. But we'll get to that later. So tell me, how did you get into 3D quad flying?
Yeah, so like 3D was always this perversion of an idea. Back when I got into it, there weren't 3D props. There were really very little support for it. And there wasn't really even terminology for it or like how to set it up. There's no information anywhere. And before that, I got into drones because of serious medical complications. I couldn't bend over, I couldn't basically sit anywhere. I dropped out of college because I couldn't go to college. I stopped riding my motorcycle because I couldn't ride that anymore. It was pretty bad. Like I have massive digestive issues. I had massive amount of nerve damage to my left leg, and I still have nerve damage to my left leg and pudendal nerve. So it's hard for me to sit, and it's hard for me to like. It's just difficult. I deal with chronic pain, but at the time, like I couldn't do anything. And basically, when you drop out of life, and if you're a motorcyclist, like you know what it is to ride a motorcycle, and for a lot of people, that's therapy. So I got hurled into the depths of internal hell, basically, and I didn't have my way out anymore. And a friend of mine was like, Zoe, you need a new hobby. And I was like, you're right. So I went down to the local hobby shop and I bought a little itsy bitsy Proto X, not FPV. I had no idea what FPV was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it home. I crashed it a bajillion times. But the thing is, every time I was done flying it and a battery was dead, I was right there charging that battery. And I essentially killed the battery on that thing within a week.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I went back for Nano QX and I fell in love with acro mode because that was like an actual hobbyist drone you could buy at the hobby shop that had full acro and allowed you to do things that you can only really do on some of our much more involved setups.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea what acro mode was. So I flew that a little bit, and then I went back to the hobby shop to try to get the next best thing. And the next best thing was 200 bucks. And it was essentially a larger version of the Nano QX with a tiny, same size board in the middle with like almost the same size motors. And my brain, I was like, I could probably build something. This might be my chance to get into it. So I found Flight Test, I found RC model reviews, and I fell in love with Alex on Flight Test and his Spider Hex. It
Mm-hmm.
was a Blackout Mini H Spider or Blackout Spider Hex, and essentially at the time most quadcopters were the Blackout variety, and the ZMR wasn't really even a thing on the scene yet. It was just Blackout. So I ended up getting a Spider Hex. I built it out. It took me about 3 months to actually build it out. I had massive problems with it, like hitting my head against wall problems. Like I would take it with me to the hospital and work on it while I was recovering from surgeries and stuff. And it was one of those things that really kind of gave me something to focus on outside of myself, which is something I really needed at the time. And I was so focused on this idea of being able to disconnect from my body and fly freely with the drone. Like I wanted to have that. I wanted to have that freedom that I was so sorely missing. So I was driven. I spent months literally bashing my head trying to figure out why it wouldn't work. And at the time, I didn't follow anyone's build guide. Like I bought my own components from different manufacturers in different places. A lot of it was from Hobby King at the time. And I used these, they were Afro 20 amp ESC Slims. They were meant for bigger motors. So when I used them on the 1806 motors I had, they constantly desynced. So every time I tried to fly the machine, it would desync and fall to the ground. So for over a month, I was driven mad by why is this machine kind of working and why is it not flying? And desync issues weren't really a thing people dealt with. There wasn't a lot of information. Like now, there's tons of information on YouTube, RC groups, different forums, Facebook groups. Like it's a lot easier to access that stuff now, but then it wasn't. So I contacted David Klein over at Rotor Geeks, and I asked him, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "Hey, I think it's a desync issue, and if you flash the ESCs of BL Heli, you might be able to fix it." And so I went through this process of flashing my first ESCs with the little tool and not
Yeah.
even knowing what FTDI tools are and all this stuff, and went through the process of flashing 6 of the ESCs. And in the process, I enabled active braking, which actually upgraded the machine before I actually had a chance to fly it. Um, and it was magical. Like once it all worked, like I remember the final test, I was in a hospital room spinning everything up, and I actually got it up off the ground. And immediately after, a nurse came in and she's like, "What is going on in here? It sounds like a pack of drills going off." I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm just hover testing a drone." Do not hover test a spider hex in a hospital. Just not a good idea. That's like a classic newbie mistake. You're like doing
Right.
things you probably shouldn't be doing. Um, but it was freeing. So my first time flying it, I was staying at a hotel and I went to fly over their parking lot. Horrible idea.
Oh
First
yeah.
first attempt, first time in goggles, everything. I take off and I fall backwards. And the drone goes forwards. I immediately disarm, the drone falls, I fall, and that was my first time flying FPV. But I was hooked. I was hooked on this whole idea of like every little like change I made, I got a little bit closer to that freedom. And about 2 weeks after that initial flight and repair, I finally got it up in the air. And I was finally actually flying around the park. And some of that footage is actually still up on my channel.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see my first flights with my Spider Hex, and it's kind of jarring to see like where I started and then where I'm at now. Um, and it's been a wild ride. Like I just fell in love with FPV. I fell in love with mini quads. And I fell in love with the technology. Like I felt like this was like a final frontier for technology that's just being explored. And here I am at the precipice of it, doing something that's interesting and not many people are actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I got into FPV. I mean, I could keep going on with the story about like
So
the
what
first races, but it's yeah.
what time period? What, when you first got in the air? What? Give me a year reference. Is that 2015?
2014.
2014? Okay.
Yeah, towards the end of 14. Um, that was realistically the time I got into it. And then at the very beginning of 2015 was the first ever AMA sanctioned drone race in the US. And it just so happened to be in my hometown. And I saw it posted about a month and a half in advance, and I thought that sounded like the coolest thing in the world. Like racing drones through a course. What? So I spent a month and a half practicing. I went to a place I called 40 Thieves,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially was a bunch of trees that were about 4 to 3 feet apart, and it acted like the most perfect like training ground ever. And so I got comfortable flying through the trees and basically emulating Metal Danny. He was one of my favorite pilots at the time, because he would constantly like fly through the trees at full tilt, like not giving a single flying F. And I was inspired by that. So seeing him in Blackout, and at the time Charpu just became like exploded onto the scene when I started flying. Seeing what they were doing really inspired me to continue to push. So like Metal Danny inspired me to fly in the trees. Charpu inspired me to fly 45-degree tilts. And I even made a HD mount for the Spider Hex, because at the time you had zero tilt on those Spider Hexes. Like you could not put tilt on an HD camera if you tried. So I made a top mount for my HD camera that was at 45 degrees using zip ties for vibration dampening.
Oh my
And that's how I
gosh.
got my first amount of footage with the Spider Hex. So like I was flying it at a really good pace when you watch those videos compared to what most people were. So that machine carried me through to that first race, and it was really intense. It's actually really interesting. Nate from X Class, the current CEO, he was racing against me. He came in second, and then my longtime friend. Steven from Santa Cruz, who now works at Discount Hobbies here in San Diego, which is
Mm-hmm.
awesome because I get to keep my friend. Um, he also raced against me, and it was really neat because there's about 15 people, and at the final three it was us, and those three people have stayed with me in my life to this day. And I really appreciate the friendships it's created for me. But that also was kind of the thing that put me on the map. I was basically disabled. I was flying drones. I was a girl. And those three things together were like prime candidates for me becoming semi-popular on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
um, so that kind of got me my first bit of notoriety. And then a couple articles were written on the first race. They mentioned me, my channel, and they showed some of my videos. And that's when I first got a video above several thousand views. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? I
Yeah.
went from like
Yeah.
20 to 30 views to several thousand. What's going
What's
on?
going on? Yeah.
And that's also when I was like, okay, well, maybe this is going to be a career, especially after Scott Refsland of DSA, or at the time it was called Flying Grounds. He told me after that race, Zoe, in 6 months from now, you will be able to make this a full-time living. You'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to be paid to be a drone racer and to make this your career. And that was extremely infectious, because here I am, a broken human being who just found their love of FPV, and now they're being told that they can make this their career. Um, who wouldn't want to go down that path, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what happened. Like I started to make it. It was not just my career option; it was my passion. Like I really loved flying. I loved the technology behind it. So for me to put energy behind it wasn't too hard. Um, and it's been one thing after another. Eventually, after that initial race, I started experimenting with 3D mode. And that's when Drone Nationals 2015 was announced. And I wanted to fly 3D at the first big freestyle event in the world. And that was my goal. Um, I did, and my machine was catching fire essentially midair.
Oh
The
gosh.
technology was definitely not there. I was using 2217 motors, like these giant
Yeah.
7-inch motors running
Wow.
6-inch props, and on a hovership Zool frame that was made for 5-inch props.
Wow.
And I like slam decked it. I did a bunch of modifications to the setup. But the biggest downfall for me was I finished building it like a week and a half before Drone Nationals, and it was completely different than my Spider Hex, and it flew completely different. And then I also gave away my Spider Hex to the AMA Museum, and with it my goggles and transmitter. So I found a sponsor, Multirotor Superstore sponsored me. They gave me a transmitter, Tyrannus, a used one at that, which ended up breaking during the competition.
Oh no.
I ended up getting goggles, which were Dominator SEs at the time, which were less field of view and not as comfortable as the goggles I had. And then I was flying an unfamiliar machine at the event, so I didn't do all that great. And then on
Mhm.
top of it, during the race, their lap timing system didn't pick up any of my laps. So next to my name, they had DNF in all the races, which I
Oh.
only found out after the fact. Like during the event, no one walked up to me and said, "Hey Zoe, your machine's not reading on the, scoreboard. Like what's going on?" So I was pissed because I had 3 different camera crews following me at that point in time.
Hmm.
One was doing a documentary, and 2 of them were news crews. And like I had so much pressure on me. I had so many eyeballs on me, not just the pilots, but the media, and then to have so much technical problems. It was a nightmare. It was not fun. But I got through that. I kept moving on. You
Was
know,
that
I,
the one in Hawaii? The Drone Nationals?
no, yeah.
No,
So
that
that was
was in
Drone Worlds.
Drone Worlds. Okay.
Yeah, so Drone Worlds happened the next year. Um, so after Drone Nationals 15, a bunch of like DRL essentially announced at the same time. And it's funny, weird story. DRL had actually invited me out to go fly for the first like race, and I ended up having to turn it down because they scheduled it a week apart from the Drone Nationals 2015 event, which already had camera crews following me, already had a bunch of stuff lined up for it, so it was really hard for me to like move things around. And that
Hmm.
was also the first time I noticed the cattiness within the drone industry, scheduling events on top of other people to screw with their productions, which is still a thing. I see a lot of that in the industry. But it was really, really, really neat. It's still an experience that I hold dear to me. I mean, even though it was a crapshoot in a lot of ways, it was still something I wouldn't trade in for the world. And then from 2015, realistically, it went into a bunch of other different events. Like Dubai ended up happening. I ended up not getting to go to that. I started working a little bit with DR1. I actually pitched the whole giant drone racing concept to them back in 2015. So it was like it's an old idea, and it was one that I was super passionate about because for me, watching drone racing was pretty boring. I
Yeah.
mean, they're like to describe what I've heard other reporters call it. It looks like flying gnats that sound like angry bees. So I saw that to make it more of a spectator thing, they need to go big. And at the time, there really wasn't people doing that. So, like, fast forward to the 2016 Nationals. Now they have qualifier events for it. You don't just get invited to come and you're not just like pulled into it. So I ended up going to a qualifier event. I qualified for the racing portion and I got into the freestyle portion. And from that event, you have the Drone Worlds event, which the top 3 pilots from the Drone Nationals event and freestyle and racing were going to go on to that event. And that was kind of like the thing I was focusing on. Um, During that event, I had other sponsor issues, and this has been a continual thing and a headache of mine. When you rely on sponsors, and if you have several of them to get your equipment going, it only takes one of them to fail you to make everything fall apart.
Hmm.
Like, the worst part on your drone is going to be the weakest link. In this case, I was not able to get batteries in time, and I had ran out to my sponsor, said, "Hey, I need fresh batteries for my freestyle run. It's not going to work without them." And I ended up sitting on the freestyle pilot line for about an hour and a half while they waited for other pilots to show up because they weren't going to start the event without all their star pilots. Kind of understandable. But in the chaos of that, my sponsor couldn't find me and didn't realize I was already at the pilot line. So I had an old battery. I ended up flying, and this is like one of my pet peeves with freestyle competitions at the time. You generally only get like one battery to lay down a freestyle run. And if you're a freestyle pilot at a high level, you kind of need to warm up a little bit.
Hmm.
You just don't just go out of the gate with fire. And if you do, you're really good and you got really lucky. Because I've seen great pilots do really bad in freestyle competitions, and I've seen meh pilots do better than them because they were able to cut back from what they normally do and just stay up in the air. So needless to say, I ended up flying with half a pack. My pack died halfway through my performance, and I had to land. But it was still good enough to give me fifth place at the competition, but was not good enough to get me into the Aloha Cup. And at the time, I was sponsored by Airvus, and I contacted Airvus, and I asked them, I said, "Hey, there's the Aloha Cup coming up. It's the last chance qualifier for Drone Worlds. It's in Hawaii. Please send me to this event. Like, I will win, and I am going to get into Drone Worlds." And while this is happening, Drone National 16 is airing on ESPN, and I'm watching myself crying at the chaos and the ensuing. Like, literally have a shot of a judge coming over to me and saying, "Zoe, you're not going to Drone Worlds."
Hmm.
And it just stuck with me. Like, it put a fire in my belly I had not felt in a long time. And it really got me to push myself to a different level. And through that, I went to the Aloha Cup. It was basically a 3-day event before another 3-day event. And I ended up qualifying in second place with that event, which was a huge load off my shoulders. But then it also let me warm up for the next event coming up, which was going to be Drone Worlds. So it qualified me for Drone Worlds. I get into Drone Worlds, and it was kind of a crapshoot. They said they were going to have dedicated judges for the pilots. That didn't happen. Pilots ended up judging themselves, which was a crapshoot within itself. And there's still a little bit of controversy on it, which I don't understand, because they released at the time showed people the scoring, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But I mean, there's always a thing with freestyle competitions, and it's always a thing. You think one pilot did better than another because it's slightly subjective. So, and especially at Drone Worlds, the person that won, Shane, Humboldt 710, he was the only pilot that was able to combine the course and the long range aspect that we had available to us. So he was able to do multiple things that other pilots really weren't doing. I mean, like myself, I primarily focused on the course and doing 3D. High Flight, he focused primarily on the course. And then you had Chile Vela, who primarily focused on the long range in the mountains. He didn't really touch the course. And so all of us really had vastly different freestyle runs. And I think that kind of led to a little bit of the heat. And on top of that, the freestyle event, even though it was kind of lackluster for some of us, it went off without a hitch. It started on time, it ended on time, and that was the only part of the Drone Worlds events that actually started and ended on time. Because it was a mess. If you were a racing pilot, you had a really bad day. At one point in time, the storms kicked up and literally blew away some of the racing tents and equipment. And there's the historic fact that there was only 2 restrooms for several hundred people.
Yeah, I heard. I have heard from various people that event was interesting, to use a
And
kind term.
in some ways, I mean, and I still actually kind of see it as setting back drone sports largely. From the inside scuttlebutt, from what I heard, Drone Nationals, they had GoPro as a primary sponsor, and then GoPro pulled out of the Drone Worlds event, at least with cash, or didn't pay them on time, and so they essentially went to Drone Worlds with no funding.
Mm.
And it was partially what caused the crapshoot. That's also what is partially caused by the backhand of the industry. Like a lot of infighting, a lot of different groups that I know of have actually contacted sponsors of other groups to get them to pull out of those other groups. And so when stuff like that happens, it becomes a very toxic industry to try to sponsor and be a part of. And so we saw a major drop off in major sponsorships hitting the drone industry after that event. And I feel like we're still recovering from that in a lot of ways. We still haven't had, besides the Chinese, $2 million race or whatever from FAI in Shenzhen, we haven't had really the big public races like we did at one point in time. At least the spectacles and the sport. Like DRL is a spectacle, and they definitely shoehorn a lot of the sport into it. But like DSA was trying to run the balance of spectacle and sport, being open to all the pilots and being available to the community,
Hmm.
while also packaging it into something that's watchable for the general audience. And we really haven't had that since then. And it's been kind of disappointing to me because I really saw drone racing as like an Olympic level sport where if you're good enough, you can qualify and get into it. And it's not exclusive club of a few pilots. I mean, it's, a groups of 100, 200 pilots that are ranked against each other. And it's kind of started to happen again with multi-GP. I mean, multi-GP has definitely, I won't say anything bad, but they've definitely taken over the market in a lot of ways, and they've
Hmm.
definitely pushed it forward. They have more rankings now, and they have the most ranked pilots in the US, and they're definitely reaching out internationally, so that's definitely a thing. Um,
Yeah, but I spoke with Chris Thomas, who's actually, his interview was live, not this week, but last week. And, even then, during that, he mentioned that they're still not profitable as a company. Um,
I know at one point in time, Chris said I'm not gonna. He said it was quite a bit of money that they're in the
yeah,
hole for right now. It's essentially a passion project for Chris Thomas. I mean, he
yeah.
runs Superior Roofing, which is a huge roofing company in the East Coast, and through that, he has helped fund multi GP through his personal wealth to try to push that forward as a drone sport. And to that's a huge risk he's taking, and I totally understand the risk he's taking with that. Um, and I think this also kind of comes to a slightly different head. Multi-GP is a for-profit business, whereas like the AMA is largely a non-profit community-based organization. Um, like, and this is kind of one of my biggest problems with drone racing right now. Most of the groups in it are in it for profit, whether it's DRL, multi-GP, IDRLC, all of the names, it's a for-profit venture.
Hmm.
And when you start doing that, I feel like you start losing a little bit of what made drone racing drone racing. That was the community aspect of it. And I know they've tried to make it community oriented, but still, if you're a for-profit business, essentially you're using the community to make money. And I feel like it needs to be more of a two-way street. And one of the reasons why I really wish and hope the AMA would actually roll their own racing league or run their own drone sports arm, because I feel like they would keep it more level-headed. They wouldn't be ones to go after other sponsors. It would be more focused on the sport itself and the community and what they can do to drive that forward versus how they can make a profit. And if we had that in drone racing, I think we could get a lot further, at least as a community. Um, but that's
I,
just my opinion.
Zoe has lived FPV history. And even though that segment was very long, I feel like it really brings out what the early days of FPV racing were like. In the next episode, Zoe and I dig really, really deep into policy and why drone racers and why drone FPV enthusiasts should embrace the AMA. Stay tuned because it's going to be real. I'd like to say thank you to my patrons. You know how to check them out. Go down to the link below. If you'd like to contribute, go ahead. I'd also like to plug Give Back October. Give Back October is what I'm going to be doing in October to highlight some folks in the drone industry that don't get the attention and recognition that maybe they deserve. So we're going to give them that attention and recognition. I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope that you'll join me in it. Talk to you soon. Bye.